everyone, Taylor here of TG Sounds with a special bonus video. I had the chance to speak with a very good friend of mine, the choral director at School 1 in Little Falls, New Jersey, Matthew Schmidt. His students are currently studying music and film, so they had a lot of questions about being a composer and about how the industry works and what it's like. We talked through some fantastic questions and even improvised some fun little ideas and examples, so big thanks to Mr. Schmidt and all of School 1 for their curiosity. Let's check it out.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another sixth grade music class. We've been focusing heavily on music and film for the past couple of weeks, so I figured why not talk to an expert? And so it's my pleasure to introduce to you not only a fantastic musician and composer, but also my good friend, Taylor Goodson.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me, Mr. Schmidt. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for agreeing to join us. It's really, really a pleasure for us to get to talk to you today.
Of course. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. So I guess we'll just, before we get to the questions, do you want to just tell us a little bit about yourself and, what you do for a living?
Of course. I'm Taylor Goodson. I'm a freelance composer and percussionist here in the New York area. I write for podcasts, video games, film, television, anything you need. I do a lot of composition for the concert stage as well, and I perform with a whole lot of orchestras and ensembles here in the New Jersey, New York area, and it's a very rewarding time.
Excellent. I've had the pleasure of seeing a lot of your performances, and, when I say professional musician, I really mean you're a top-notch.
Oh, thank you. That's too kind.
So to my students who are watching at home, I met Taylor through Montclair State University. We were both in the orchestra together. Taylor is a fine percussionist. I, of course, was in the oboe section, and somehow our lives crossed paths. And, we are still friends today. And one of the things that I think about, in terms of this music class that I'm teaching right now is whenever we're together, Taylor, I would say like 85 to 90% of our conversations are about music scores. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of stories to be had.
Yeah, so you're absolutely the first person that came to mind for this interview. So I'm going to go ahead. I compiled a list of questions from my students, and thank you to everybody that contributed to this list. I did condense it a little bit because some of your questions were very similar, and instead of having repeated questions, I just kind of condensed them so that we weren't rambling for hours on end. So if you don't hear your exact question, I apologize, but we will get the gist of that. So here is question number 1. Taylor, what gives you inspiration when writing music?
Well, inspiration can come from all sorts of places. For the kinds of music I write, the inspiration actually comes from the creative minds of other people more often than not. A lot of times I'll be writing music that matches the setting or matches the scene that somebody else has created, and they've hired me to write music for. So the inspiration comes from the client, really. So someone who might draw a picture of a character or tell me what that character is doing or what the scene is, and it's my job to find music that can represent that in the best way.
Excellent. Very cool. When you are not doing a commissioned piece, say you're just writing for your own pleasure, where do you draw inspiration in that situation?
Well, once again, I have to decide what the subject material is. For example, one of my large works, my first symphony, which is titled War of the Worlds, the inspiration from that was from my love of the novel by H.G. Wells, titled The War of the Worlds, and just the way those chapters unfold and the story progresses, it speaks to you on a level where you just want to put music to it. And I find that inspiration comes from all sorts of places in that regard.
Great. How did you start up and put yourself out there? Let's say in the composition world.
Well, the first thing I did to become a professional composer, I guess you could say, was I submitted a bunch of works for competition, really. And I was lucky enough to be selected as a winner to the Dallas Wind Symphony Fanfare competition back in 2010. So that was my first real success as a composer. I mean, I had written many pieces before that, but that was the first one that was recognized on a national level. So that was really what proved to me that this is something that I could possibly do. So that after a taste of that kind of success, that's really what kicked it off.
Fantastic. Um, let's see. As a kid, did you know that you wanted to be a composer? And did you enjoy music, let's say in the same way when you were a kid?
When I was a kid, I did not think I'd be in music at all. I was actually really keen on the sciences. I wanted to be a chemist. I wanted to be someone who dealt with laboratory stuff and really interesting things in that side of the world. But I didn't really experience music until later in my career. I was a pianist when I was a little kid, just plunking away at the piano and figuring things out. But it wasn't until high school where I really got involved into music. So when I was younger, when I was a kid, as you said, I was really not focused on music yet because I didn't really experience it. So it was an interesting turn for me when I finally got involved in music when I entered high school and was looking for other things to do. And it definitely changed the course of my life easily.
Yeah, absolutely. That's always so interesting for me because I I feel like as far back as I can remember, I've always wanted to do music for a career. Whether it was performing or teaching or some aspect, it was always grounded in music. So when I hear other people who, are fine musicians talking about how they, made the switch later on in life, it's just so weird to me because I come from such a different point of view there.
Yeah, and I don't want to say that I wasn't musical before that. Of course, I was playing piano and dabbling for fun on the side, but it just wasn't a primary focus. So it's interesting to see how it became from a hobby and an interest to eventually be my career.
Yeah. I mean, I guess talking to my students, let that be a lesson to you guys. You are at a point in your life where you're going to start thinking about your careers, and things that interest you now are probably things that are going to shape your career. But things might change in the future, and I think that's sometimes you just have to go with what life throws at you.
Yeah, just experience as much as you can and let every opportunity come your way. You never know which one's going to stick.
All right. Let's see. Um, were you? No, we talked about that. Did you? Okay. Did you like doing music all of your life? So I know you're still pretty young, but do you ever feel like maybe you get sick of doing music, or do you still find the same passion and drive right now?
No, I've always loved it. I mean, let's be real. We went through music school. There were definitely a lot of ups and downs and a lot of difficult patches where you might not be getting those results you're looking for, and you might be struggling here and there. But for the most part, I have to say I'm pretty fulfilled with what's going on, especially now. I'm comfortable with where I've landed and how things are progressing, and excited for what the future can bring, as there's so much opportunity out there. But it was not an easy journey by any means. I will say that. There were a lot of times where I was sitting alone thinking to myself, like, is this really the path I want to be on? There's a lot of questions here. But as of now, yes, absolutely. It has been well rewarded by now. And it has been a hard journey, but a very, very rewarding one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. Are you always busy doing things for your job? Do you find that work is plentiful, or do you find a lot of downtime?
Um, Well, I hold many jobs, so I'm pretty busy between performing and writing music and working some other things that I do every day. But I would say yes, I'm very, very, very busy. Whether I'm working on a project for a client specifically, or if I'm working on something just for myself, I find that I'm always writing. I always have the drive to put some notes down. So in that regard, yes, I'm always working. But the best part about doing something that you really love is it doesn't really feel like working. It feels like I'm just
Yeah.
enjoying creating. And whether I'm making money off of that or doing it for myself, I'm always creating. I'd rather use that word than working, as it's I don't want to use the negative connotation of work, but I'm always writing and always experiencing new things, and that's always exciting.
Excellent. Great. Let's see. Was there ever a time, in your process when working with either a director or somebody that commissioned a piece of music, was there ever a time that that person disagreed with you or your work?
Oh, of course, that happens all the time. As a composer, especially when you are hired to write something for a specific moment, and when those moments are written by someone else, like a story or a scene that someone has filmed, they're looking for music to enhance the scene in a certain way. So a lot of the times I'll write something and we'll talk about it and review it. And sometimes they say that it's perfect, they love it, no problem. But other times they might not agree with the way I went or the direction I took at that moment. So you go back and you adjust some things, you talk it over. I have to discuss what they're looking to do emotionally with the scene versus what I provided, and we can come to a middle ground. And there has been a lot of times in a lot of different projects, both for the stage and for digital media and all sorts of projects, that I have had very great and long discussions about what to change and what to adjust. But as a composer, you have to realize that, especially in those mediums, that you are writing music to enhance something else. You have to be completely aware that you are a servant to the greater project. So you can't be too firm on everything that you've decided yourself, especially in those regards when you're working for a commission or you're working on someone else's project. You got to be sure that you're willing to make changes and not be too stuck in the mud, as it were. For my own personal projects, I don't have to worry about that sort of thing. I just write music for what I feel is the right course. But when I'm writing for someone else, you absolutely have to be a team player.
Yeah. I mean, I love this question because it makes me think of the piece that you wrote for me when I hired you to write a flute piece for me. And, I remember there are times when you would send me little snippets here and there and you'd be like, all right, what do you think of this? And, for the most part, I'm your biggest fan, but for the most part, I was like overwhelmed and like super happy with what you produced. But there were times when I was like, oh, I would, prefer this to be a little, different here or there. And so it definitely is a collaboration. I just really like that question because I have experienced that process with you.
Yeah, that's a great question. But yeah, as a composer, you just got to be able to be open, experience new things, try new stuff. Don't get stuck in your old ways all the time. Really try and push the envelope because you're making new stuff. This isn't old music. This is brand new. So, why not just give it a whirl? Try something new.
Yeah.
That's
absolutely.
The most exciting part. That's what I love so much, is that everything I write down is something new.
Well, you just answered my next question, which was, why do you enjoy music?
Well, yeah, that's a good one. And, I'm also a performer, so I'll flip that around too. I like performing because I can add something new, add something that's my own to music that's already predefined. We play the same masterworks over and over again with different orchestras, and we love them to death, and we've studied them for years and years and years. But there's always something new to bring to the table. I go play this piece with this orchestra, but then I play the same piece with another orchestra, and it fits together slightly different because people have different ideas of what to bring forward with it. And it's very refreshing as a live performer to get the opportunity to make tiny little changes, even on something that we've played so many times.
Yeah. And even with, with the choir that I teach in Little Falls, it's a different group year to year. So, it never sounds exactly the same, and its pieces are never performed the same way, which is one thing that I really enjoy as well. So speaking of being an instrumentalist, what is the first instrument you played?
First instrument I played when I was in, I think, second or third grade was piano. That's what I started on. Had one at home, so I was just poking away at it for a number of years, trying to figure out how it works and copy sounds that I would hear from the radio or movies that I had on VHS tape at the time. And so
I did the same thing.
Exactly. You just poke around with piano and try to figure it out.
Now, so piano was your first instrument. When did you get into percussion instruments?
I started percussion my freshman year in high school. And it was actually by accident because the marching band that I was interested in joining was looking for keyboard players. I'm like, oh, well, I play keyboard, I play piano, so let's try that. But then they stuck two mallets in my hand, and what they actually meant was keyboard percussion. So I fell in love with that really fast and then became a percussionist. So it had quite a positive effect on me.
Great. Excellent. Let's see. I'm going to jump more into, let's go to more like the business aspect of being a composer.
Sure.
So let's see. What is the hardest thing about being a film composer? And you can take that as a cinematic composer or, something along that lines. So what's the hardest thing about that?
Oh man, that's a tough question. There's a lot of things that are difficult about it, but a lot of the time it's deadlines. Like deadlines are just real tough in the film world. Just you need to come up with a track that does X, Y, and Z, and you have this much time, and you really got to crank it out now. And that's always really really challenging to do, is to get something that you feel is personally rewarding and appropriate for the project, and to have the meetings with the people that are necessary to make sure it's right and get it all done in time. It's really really challenging to do that because there's a lot of components to putting something together like that. So yeah, I'd probably say the biggest challenge is just time management.
Great. I mean, that actually leads to my next question. So somebody asked, so say a director gave you, say they wanted 5 minutes of a scene with music in the background,
Mm-hmm.
and they asked how long would it take to do that amount of music,
Ooh,
or be as general or specific as you can be.
that's a really really hard question to answer. So it entirely depends on what those 5 minutes of music need. Let's say we're doing something where it's a very intense discussion about something very gentle. There's two characters on the screen that are talking real soft, and they're in a very somber area. So I might actually have to write a lot of thick music. I might just do a little strings and piano or something gentle to really help that scene guide along. Or on the flip side of that, there could be some giant battle happening on the scene where I need every instrument in the orchestra and a choir, and I need all of these components to tell the story. So I could write 5 minutes of music that's just piano in, I mean, if I do it perfectly, I could do it in 5 minutes because it's just me recording one track at a time. But if it's something where I need the full complement of orchestra instruments, it could take me a week to write at least 5 minutes, perhaps longer, depending on how it's working. It depends on the forces required. So it's a hard question to answer because there's so many different factors for that. But it could be really fast or really long, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, could you talk to us about sort of your writing process? So, like, do you start off writing on a piano and then transcribe that to instruments later, or do you think orchestra parts right off the bat? How does
Um,
that work for you?
it's kind of a combination of both. Most of the time, I will create a piano sketch first. It's just a way for me to get my ideas out there, and then I can start timing things up with, if it's a film, I can start timing stuff up with the film as I have my track there, and it's tweaking it on the computer there. But sometimes I will go right into writing for the section. If I know for a fact that this section of music needs to have strings, I'll put a string sound on the keyboard and kind of play with that. But it really does. It's just me and my friend over here at my keyboard. We really are the starting point for most of my writing.
Excellent. Um, let's see. Is it hard to make money slash get a job as a composer, and how competitive would you say that industry is?
The short answer to that is yes. It is very competitive. It's difficult to get into, absolutely. It's great to know people who are working on projects and make relationships early on. Networking, of course, in the music world, far beyond composers, is incredibly important. So you got to know the right people and talk to the right people, but you also got to be personal. You got to know how to work with people and understand their needs and their desires. You can't, just like we talked before, you can't be stuck on your own ideas and really and focus on what you want to say, because what you want to say is not necessarily what everybody wants to hear. So there's this relationship you have to create between yourself and your listeners and your clients to really bridge that gap, to bring what you can bring to the table, but also take what they are bringing to the table and work with that. So you really have to be malleable. You really have to work together and have a team-based mentality. And that's even beyond composition and a lot of other components of the musical field. Like that's really key. You got to be able to work with other people.
Yeah, there's so much truth to that, and I feel like being a musician at its core is really being able to work with other people. I mean, you cannot play in an orchestra without having a relationship with the people you're playing with, and you can't, even play a solo piece because you need an accompanist who you can work with. And it's just such a collaboration in every regard. So I can definitely see why that's important as a composer as well.
Definitely. And, some of the people I've worked with on these projects are just some of the nicest people. And those are the people that I work with regularly all the time. It's people that are nice, they're genuine, they're excited, they have ideas, and they're willing to have a conversation. And that's really exciting. I love working with those kinds of people.
Mm-hmm. Great. Let's see. What is the most challenging thing you have done so far as a composer?
Ooh, that's a hard question. The most challenging thing. I was actually writing music for a client for a podcast introduction once, and we had to go through so many different revisions because my ideas and their ideas were just not getting closer. So I guess that was one of the more difficult things. It wasn't because anybody was being difficult. They just were very specific with what they had in mind, and what I had in mind wasn't exactly what they were looking for. So we both started on opposite sides, and we really had to work our way to the middle. But we did eventually work our way to the middle, and I think the end project was fantastic. So I don't want to say that was, it wasn't not rewarding. It was very rewarding. It was a longer process than usual trying to find that middle ground. So sometimes you just might have different ideas, and you got to do what you can to get to the middle. So yeah, that was probably one of the more difficult things. It wasn't the largest thing I did. It was only maybe a minute and a half of complete published music, but the process was a challenge. And it was a challenge that I was excited to work through because I wanted to see how this would go. I didn't want to fight them. I didn't want to do any of that. I'd like to take the challenge and accept it and really create what they want. And I'm happy to say that it was a success, even though it was challenging.
I can't imagine it wouldn't have been, but
oh, you're too kind.
So can you talk to us about your training in composition? So did you get any kind of formal training for this, or is this something that you were just naturally good at?
A little of both. I spent a lot of time with you in orchestra and band and all these other ensembles, and that, especially as a percussionist, where you might have some downtime. You might not play in this piece, or you might only play in a few spots in this piece. I had a lot of time to listen. I had a lot of time to digest and understand how ensembles work. So having all that time in those ensembles was what really made me understand composition, form, structure, and instrumentation, all those things. It was great to just live in it and experience it. But then, of course, going through music school, I had to go through all of theory training and all orchestration and all that. So I did take a lot of additional study in those fields. So I didn't go to school specifically for composition. I majored in performance, but they really go hand in hand. My experiences as a performer have molded me as a composer. So I don't say that I'm never going to say that I taught myself composition. That's not really true. My entire musical experience has molded my sound.
Excellent. Who would you say are your composer role models?
Oh, well, that's an easy question. Of course. I'll start with Mr. John Williams, of course. I mean, he's the first film composer who I really sat there and I was just blown away by what he could write and the way his music just enhanced the story before my eyes. And it was an experience hearing that music for the first time that I'll never forget. And even to this day, it's something that I cherish unbelievably. But other film composers too. Michael Giacchino is who many of you probably know from his work on the Pixar films, the Star Trek franchise, a lot of other fantastic television shows and films and some video games and all that. And he's a big influence on mine. I love his ability to change style and be a malleable composer, as we discussed a little bit before. Mm-hmm. Those are my biggest influences on like the commercial setting.
Great. Let's see. Can you talk to us about some of the resources that composers have at their disposal at this day and age? So, when I teach my third graders, we talk a lot about classical composers like Mozart and Beethoven. And, back then they had a pen and a piece of paper. But we live in the age of technology. So can you just talk to us about some resources that you might use?
Absolutely. Well, we don't want to ignore the pen and paper because that does still apply. I do have a I do have a notebook that I carry around and jot things down in when I need to. But for finishing projects and really moving forward in the process, yes, everything is now digital. I have, of course, my keyboard here, and that's plugged into a bunch of different sounds and programs on the computer. But I use a couple different things. Most important to me is Sibelius. That's music notation software. So that's what actually puts the notes down on paper, well, digital paper in this case. But that's where my ideas actually go, so other musicians can then read it later. And then I use Logic Pro and some other audio softwares to use for samples and using for mixing projects, doing recordings, all sorts of things like that. But those are my main softwares that I use, just Logic Pro and Sibelius.
Great. Can you talk? I'm going to get a little technical for my students now. So
Great.
When you're writing a piece, or say, a little melody or a theme, what would you say? What's the difference between your melody and, say, your harmonies? Or maybe you could even demonstrate, you're very improvisational on the keyboard. Maybe you could give us a little demo of what like a melody is comprised of and how the harmonies sort of back up that melody for a theme.
Sure. Well, the interesting thing about melody and harmony is how they are so related. And a lot of people, it's kind of like a chicken or the egg question. It's like, what comes first? Do you write the harmony or do you write the melody? And it really is, it is a gamble, really. I don't know. Sometimes I have a chord structure that I really want to do, so I'll fit a melody into that. Or I write a melody and then I'm like, oh, well, I can put these chords on it or maybe these chords. For example, we can write something really basic, like, let's see, start with an octave that goes down a scale. We'll call that our melody. It's very, very, very basic. But you could do so many things with it. I can start in this key with it.
You can't. I mean, I'm already crying.
Or, I mean, we can change the melody. Or not change the melody. Change the harmony to do something new with it. It's the same melody, but we've just completely changed it to be a little more hopeful, a little more gentle. Instead of that first one that was a little more triumphant and solid, we now have one that kind of creeps around and we don't know where it's going to go. So it's finding the right harmony is really what I love to do. I love to write melodies and then change them around. That's something I just absolutely enjoy doing. But you could do the same thing. You could do opposite. You could have the same chords, the same harmony, and then change the melody to reflect different styles too. That's just a small little introduction to how that kind of pieces together. But those two elements really are hand in hand. Like you can't have one without the other as far as I'm concerned. Even if you just have a single melody line, in my head, there's harmony there. There's something going on. I know what those underlying chords are. Even if you're not hearing them, they have an intent. It has a direction. So you have to put all these elements to music together at once. And that's what really makes composition a fun little puzzle.
Well said. I like that. Thinking of it as a puzzle, it's it's a good visual cue for me. Trying to piece it all together. So Taylor, I have two more questions for you.
Okay.
So one of them is, what is it like to hear one of your compositions performed by a live ensemble for the first time?
There are few things on the planet as satisfying as that. Just you sit down here and you're writing just note by note on a piece of paper, trying to put it all together and, like we said, just complete the puzzle. But the puzzle is never really done until you give it to someone else to play back to you. And it's so rewarding to hear a whole contingent of musicians, uncovering your puzzle before you and seeing how that works. And of course, it's a process. There's edits to be done. There's questions they're going to have about how I should play this, or how loud should I do this section, or how fast should we take this. Of course, that's part of the process. But it is an emotion I can barely describe, to hear your own creation before you. It's so rewarding.
I mean, as somebody who has performed some of your compositions, I got so much out of it as the musician. I can't even imagine being the creator and hearing that for the first time. So Taylor, thank you so much for joining us today. It has been such a pleasure talking to you and hearing what you had to say. Before we go, can you just let us know about any upcoming projects you might have and where we can find you on social media?
Yeah, of course. You can find me all over the internet. You can find me at tayloragoodson.com. That's my website, and you can find all my social media places from there. I'm on YouTube, on SoundCloud, on Instagram, everywhere. You can find me, and there's links to me all over on that platform, and I'll link them in the description, and I'll send you links to send to people as well. Upcoming projects, I'm working on a new album based on it's some fantasy role-playing game style music. So I'm writing a whole album of that. So that'll be coming out hopefully later this year, maybe sooner. I'm not quite sure. It's a personal project, so I don't really have a deadline for that. And then I just have a couple small commissions happening right now. Some people's characters and a couple scenes that I have to write for. There might be a podcast coming up, but I can't talk too many details about some of these projects. But yeah, there's stuff in the pipeline. So if you are interested, by all means, please follow me on all those social media platforms, especially my YouTube channel, which you can find linked all over the place. And I will make sure I send Mr. Schmidt here all of that information for all of you.
Yes, I will leave it in our Google Classroom for all of you guys to find. Taylor Goodson, thank you again so much. This has been such a joy for me. And I hope that my students listening right now are really getting a lot out of it. And if you wouldn't mind, Taylor, I know you're very improvisational. If you wouldn't mind just playing us out with a little something.
Sure.
Not to put you on the spot.
No, sure. We can. Let's use the melody we had before, and we'll write something to that.
Sure.
How about that?
Sounds good.